In 1983, Gene Simmons met Shannon Tweed at the Playboy Mansion. It took him 28 years to marry her, but their 2011 wedding wasn't about love. It was about covering up a scandal that almost destroyed his family. Recently discovered footage from their reality show reveals conversations that were never meant to be public. His son was caught in a plagiarism scandal. Legal documents from 2025 mention incidents involving female employees. The man who claimed to have slept with 4,800 women is now facing consequences that go far beyond his wild reputation. Gene Simmons wasn't always Gene Simmons. He was born as Kamwitz on August 25, 1949, in Haifa, Israel. His mother, Flora Klein, had just survived health. She was born in Hungary in 1925 and had barely escaped the Nazi concentration camps. His father, parents, Yohi Witz, also escaped Hungary and married Flora in 1946. They moved to Israel in 1947, just before the state was born. With British forces still blocking the way, their past was full of pain, and that pain quietly echoed through everything would become. By the time he turned 6 in 1955, things got worse. His parents' marriage broke apart, mostly because they didn't have money. His father stayed in Israel. His mother raised him alone in Tat Carmel. She worked nearly every day in factories, sewing buttons just to feed them. Sometimes they only had bread and milk for dinner. At age 7, Kame was already trying to help. He picked wild fruit with a friend and sold it by the roadside. He knew what struggle meant. He made his first winter coat out of an army blanket. The cold didn't care, but he had no other choice. His mother worked until late at night, and he often cried himself to sleep in an empty house. At school, it didn't get any easier. Other kids bullied him for being different. Even in post-war Israel, some of the hate his mother had escaped followed him into the classroom. But something else found him too. Comic books. American ones, Spider-Man, Superman, they became his escape. He couldn't even read English yet, but he tried anyway. By age 7, he was already speaking Hebrew, Hungarian, and Turkish. And now, he was secretly picking up English, too. All because he wanted to understand the heroes in those comics. In a world still healing from war, where food was limited and hope felt rare, those stories gave him something to hold on to. His mother didn't talk much about what she'd been through, but the pain was always there. By 1957, Haim had started to see it more clearly. She had been just 14 when the Nazis forced her into labor, picking potatoes in fields while soldiers watched with guns. She wore clothes marked with crosses, moving between camps, watching her world vanish one relative at a time. She didn't need to explain it with words. Her silence, her overprotectiveness, and the way she sometimes cried without reason. Haim understood it, left something in him, too. A need to never feel weak, to never let anyone see him break. That same year, in 1957, Flora made a decision that would change everything. With barely anything to her name, she and 8-year-old Haim left Israel. They arrived in Queens, New York with no money, no English, and no family waiting. His father stayed behind, remarried, and started a new life. Haim never saw him again. He became Eugene Clean and started over. Flush toilets and TV dinners amazed him, but adapting wasn't easy. Flora worked long hours in Brooklyn factories, sometimes 15 hours a day. Gene had to take care of himself with babysitters and learned the rules of a strange new world. He went to a Jewish school for a while, but he didn't fit in. Then he switched to public school. He graduated from Newtown High in 1967. At first, kids teased him for how he talked. His accent made him feel like a stranger everywhere he went. But he didn't let it break him. He sold cactuses door to door. He picked fruit again, just like he did in Israel. Every insult, every rejection, it made him try harder. He started learning English faster by watching TV and reading more comics. That's when his obsession with pop culture exploded. By 1959, at just 9 years old, he legally changed his name again, this time to Gene Clean. He picked Gene after cowboy actors like Gene Autry. He was all in on being American now, even if he still lived in a cramped apartment with his mother and cousins. He fell in love with television, especially the Ed Sullivan Show. When the Beatles appeared on February 9, 1964, something inside him lit up. He wanted that life. He wanted the stage, the fame. He wanted to feel like someone, but inside, he still felt like the boy with nothing. He even pretended to be British sometimes, copying the Beatles' accents just to fit in. Girls liked it. He was awkward, unsure, going through the messy changes of being a teenager, but his charm was slowly growing. During the 1960s, Gene took whatever job he could find. He worked in butcher shops, slicing meat. He worked in delis behind the counter. He earned just $1,025 an hour, but he saved every bit of it. Poverty had taught him to count every cent. He stayed away from alcohol, even at parties. He noticed how older guys got drunk and sloppy. He stayed sharp. That's how he got girls. He said it himself. He used his clarity while everyone else lost theirs. He started learning guitar, practicing constantly. After seeing the Beatles on TV, party. He couldn't stop. He formed little bands and started building his future while still in school. In 1968, he went to Sullivan County Community College. He studied education, got an associate degree by 1970, and even taught 6th grade in Spanish Harlem for $75 a week. But his heart wasn't in the classroom. He joined up with Paul Stanley and formed a band called Rainbow, which soon became Wicked Lester in 1970. They played at clubs at night, worked other jobs during the day. Gan even worked at a fashion magazine. He also did translation gigs using the Hungarian, Turkish, and Spanish he picked up as a kid from babysitters and neighbors. But music was where his soul lived. He tried different sounds, even recorded some solo songs under his name. All the while, he was sending money back to his mother, still carrying the weight of her survival and everything she'd lost in 1945. Then, there was the part of his story that shocked even his fans. Gene Simmons says he lost his virginity at almost 14 years old in 1963. He was just a kid on a newspaper route. One winter evening, right before Christmas, he knocked on a customer's door. She answered, crying, wearing only a thin nightgown. She was a married woman. What happened next? He later described in detail in his book. It wasn't just the beginning of his sex life. In 1970, Gene Simmons teamed up with Paul Stanley, along with Steve Cornell, Brooke Ostrander, and Tony Zer. They formed a band called Wicked Lester. The sound was a strange mix of folk and rock, born out of the unpredictable music scene in New York City. By October 15, 1972, they had recorded a full album at Electric Lady Studios, which had been built by Jimi Hendrix. Epic Records had paid a lot to make it happen, but their A&R director, Don Ellis, absolutely hated it. He called the sound too messy and too strange for radio, so he shelved it forever. That rejection hit Gan hard. He'd poured himself into the project, and now it was dead before it even began. Furious, Gan and Paul fired Steve Cornell, brought in Ron Lajak for a short time, and then shut down Wicked Lester entirely. But that wasn't the end. After Kiss became famous, Gan and Paul paid $138,000 in 1977 to buy back the old Wicked Lester tapes just to make sure they never got released. They feared the old sound would ruin the hard-edged image they were now building. Still, bootlegs leaked online later, revealing songs like She and Love Her, All I Can, which Kiss would later re-record without crediting the original lineup. That failed band gave birth to something bigger. By January 1973, Gan and Paul were done with compromise. 1973, Gan and Paul were done with compromise. They found a Rolling Stone ad placed by Peter Criss, a seasoned drummer from bands like Lips and Chelsea. He joined quickly. Then they found Ace Frehley through a Village Voice ad. Together, the four of them created something entirely new. This wasn't going to be a regular rock band. It was going to be a wild, over-the-top show with makeup, fire, and fantasy. Inspired by the shock rock of Alice Cooper and the glam style of New York Dolls, they launched Kiss. Their first show took place on January 30, 1973, at a small club in Queens called the Coventry, which used to be called the Popcorn Club. Only 3 people showed up, some of them girlfriends of the band. But that night, Gene breathed fire on stage for the first time. It was a spectacle nobody forgot. Without a single hit song or any airtime on MTV, they built a following. Word spread through fan magazines and live shows, not through the radio. Within 18 months, they were headlining Anaheim Stadium in 1974. Gene later said their makeup was so strange and unforgettable that it just stuck in people's minds. It was raw, it was weird, and it was spreading. In 1973, Gene created the Demon. Inspired by horror films like Black Sabbath and comic book characters like Black Bolt, he painted bat wings around his eyes and started breathing fire and spitting blood on stage. He had learned the tricks from a professional. When the band first started experimenting with makeup, they had no real plan. Gene went for horror. Peter drew whiskers on his face like a cat. Ace made himself into a space alien. They stood in front of mirrors painting wildly, trying to make something nobody had seen before. Their early shows barely drew a dozen people. At the Coventry, crowds ranged from 10 to 15, sometimes fewer. But those few people left talking. Even before the internet, kids were spreading the word. Gene said it felt sticky and strange, but it was working. That makeup and fire and blood turned frustration into fascination. They didn't need a radio hit. They just needed to be unforgettable. In August 1973, a man named Bill Aucoin saw Kiss play at the Hotel Diplomat. He believed in them so much that he promised to get them a record deal within 2 weeks. And he did. By November 1st, they had signed with Casablanca Records, a brand new label run by Neil Bogart. Peter Criss was so excited when he heard the news that he literally fell off his platform heels. The band quickly recorded their first album, with help from producer Eddie Kramer. It was released on February 18, 1974. Sales were slow at first, only 75,000 copies, but the band didn't stop. They played over 300 shows that year. Casablanca Records was nearly bankrupt, but Kiss's constant touring kept them alive. Neil Bogart doubted their makeup gimmick at first, but when he saw the crowds growing, he knew it was working. By 1975, they were filling stadiums, all without a single major radio hit. Gan called it a gamble that turned them into legends. During those early years, Gene developed a strange habit. He began taking Polaroid photos of his sexual encounters. Each woman had to hold up the hotel key as proof. Over the years, he claimed to have taken nearly 5,000 of these photos, boasting in interviews that he had slept with more than 4,600 women. He even showed the photos to friends and guests. Grace Slick from Jefferson Airplane called it disgusting. Gene kept them all locked in a box. His wife, Shannon Tweed, found them after their 2011 marriage and burned them live on their reality show, ending that chapter of his life. While Gene never touched drugs, his sex addiction became part of his wild onstage persona. From small clubs to massive stadiums, he turned chaos into a performance and into power. Everything changed on September 10, 1975. That's when they released the live album Alive. It was loud, unfiltered, and filled with the madness of their shows. You could hear the fire, the screams, and the blood in every track. Songs were recorded in places like Detroit, Cleveland, Wildwood, and Davenport throughout that year. On May 16th, June 21st, July 20th, and July 23rd, the album went quadruple platinum, selling over 4 million copies. It reached number 9 on the Billboard charts and stayed there for 110 weeks. That record saved Casablanca from going under. There was even a lawsuit against Neil Bogart at the time, and Kiss's success pulled the label back from the edge. The album title, Alive, was a nod to Slade's 1972 live album, which had inspired them. It was proof that the makeup, the fire, the madness, it all worked. Suddenly, they weren't just a strange band. They were the future of rock. In 1976, they pushed further. Destroyer came out on March 15th, with producer Bob Ezrin at the helm. He added strings, a choir of children, reversed drum sounds, and sound effects. Shout It Out Loud hit number 31 on the Billboard Hot 100. Gene's song, God of Thunder, was filled with screams and darkness. But Ezrin didn't make it easy when the band gave him 15 demo tracks in August 1975. He threw out almost all of them. He rewrote their songs, rearranged the music, and even played the bass himself on Detroit Rock City. Some tracks stole ideas from classical music like Beethoven's Sonata Pathetique sampled for Great Expectations. Rehearsals began in August 1975 during a break in the Alive tour, and recording sessions continued at Electric Lady Studios through September and January. Gan's ego grew with each success, and while Ezrin polished the sound, Gene made sure his own persona stayed front and center. By the late 1970s, the tours became more than just concerts. They were full-blown spectacles. The Dynasty Tour in 1979 ran from June 15th to December 16th, with Gene flying across the stage in Ace Frehley's guitar, shooting rockets at smoke, spewing props. Their technician, John Elder Robeson, created these jaw-dropping effects. They played 92 shows across North America, but cracks were showing. Some venues were too empty, like the canceled Pontiac Silverdome shows or the downsized Los Angeles gigs. Peter Criss was struggling. His drug use got worse. He started sabotaging shows, stopping drumming mid-P performance just to lash out. Gene called it self-destruction. By the final show in Toledo on December 16, 1979, it was clear the original band was falling apart. Fans felt the shift, and disco had crept into their sound. Families started coming to shows instead of hardcore rock fans. Gene kept flying, but the band was coming down fast. In 1978, everything got stranger. NBC aired a bizarre TV movie called Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park on October 28th. It was produced by Hanna-Barbera, the same people behind Scooby-Doo. Kiss played themselves, superheroes battling an evil inventor in a theme park. Gene improvised lines about world domination, echoing his real-life plan to turn Kiss into a global brand. The acting was terrible, and fans hated it. Gan loved the attention, but the rest of the band tried to pretend it never happened. The movie was so embarrassing that people on set were banned from bringing it up later. Still, it became a cult classic, especially in Europe, where it was renamed Attack of the Phantoms. The project proved that Gene's ego wasn't just big, it was unstoppable. That same year, all 4 members released solo albums on September 18th. Gene's record outsold some of Kiss's actual group albums. It included strange covers like When You Wish Upon a Star and guest appearances from Cher and Bob Seger. His songs talked about radioactivity and twisted fantasies. Meanwhile, Kiss released Dynasty on May 23, 1979, with I Was Made for Lovin' You, reaching number 11 on the Billboard charts. It sold over 1 million copies and went platinum in 5 countries. But the disco influence hurt their image. Rock fans walked away, and ticket sales collapsed. Venues shrank. The magic was fading. Peter Criss played drums on only 1 track before quitting for good. The cracks had become splits. On September 18, 1983, Kiss did the unthinkable. They took off their makeup live on MTV. After 10 years of mystery, they revealed their real faces. At the same time, they released Lick It Up, which went platinum with over 1 million copies sold. The sound was heavier, raw, more aggressive. The gamble worked, sales jumped, and fans came back. Gene saw it as a rebirth. By then, Kiss had over 100 licensed products from action figures to lunchboxes, making millions in merch. The masks were gone, but the business was booming. In 1984, Gann took a break from music and stepped into Hollywood. He played the villain Luther in the sci-fi thriller Runaway, directed by Michael Keaton. He was a mad scientist who used killer robots to murder people. Drawing from his demon character, Gann delivered lines with dramatic flair and died at the hands of his own creations. Meanwhile, back in the band, Peter Criss had been fired in 1980 after his addiction got out of control. Gann called it a necessary amputation. Eric Carr stepped in as the new drummer known as the Fox. It was a painful loss, but it helped them start fresh. In 1989, Kiss released Hot in the Shade with the ballad Forever, hitting number 8 on the Billboard Hot 100. It sold over 500,000 copies and became their biggest hit in the no makeup years. But the sound was soft, more romantic than rebellious. Fans were confused, but the sales said otherwise. Behind the scenes, Gene was still chasing women. His affairs disrupted the band's work. He missed sessions. He picked Hollywood over rehearsals. Eric Carr sang his first lead vocal on Little Caesar, but it would be his last album before his death in 1991. Gene's distractions nearly tore everything apart. In his 2001 autobiography, Kiss and Makeup, Gene revealed the full truth. He had slept with over 4,800 women during his time in the band. One of the wildest stories came from the late 7th South. He was dating Cher between 1979 and 1980, but ended up falling for her best friend, Diana Ross. It started with a simple Christmas shopping trip and turned into a full-blown love triangle. Cher never forgave them. The scandal blew up in People magazine and it became one of the most famous betrayals in rock history. Gene stayed friends with both women, but the damage was permanent. Then came the biggest twist of all. In 1996, the original members of Kiss reunited. The makeup returned. The shows sold out everywhere. They performed in 75 cities, played 92 shows, and sold 1.2 million tickets. The tour made $143 million.